I still don't get how this does it. But there we go.
It goes live when you click the button, but on the playback it's
like 30
earlier.
seconds though. I don't know why.
It's not 30 seconds. It's a few. It's a few seconds.
But we are live. Hello.
Yeah. Hello. I'm very nervous on camera. I don't know what to do or say.
What? What? please
Welcome
don't
to Pear
do
of
this.
Geeks. I'm Becky.
I'm Jason.
And is the camera at a wonky angle?
Yes, it is. I think it is. Yes.
Yeah.
Shall I fix it?
Go on, you go be director. Get the camera shot just perfect, and I will run people down through the start of the list of things that we're talking about tonight. And I said that very slowly to delay because I actually don't know apart from the first topic.
Well, I
which
have
is
them here.
Halflings are pussies.
They.
That's a receipt for a pizza we just ate.
I was about to read it out as a joke, but you ruined it.
Tonight's episode is brought to you by the back of a receipt for pizza.
It was a very
Which
nice
is
pizza.
The only time it is acceptable to drink this horrible black stuff, but it does go very well with pizza.
Yeah, I thought you liked it. Yes, so we are doing Halflings Are Pussies.
Yes.
Which is some sort of thread. Is it on the D&D group in Facebook?
No, it
Reddit?
was in AbTab. It was raised
Yeah, it was
by
AbTab.
Lloyd Collins, who we did the game with a few years back.
Yes. Because apparently, because they're so small, any normal-sized humanoid can take them out. A balance of play, so in other words, not getting left behind other characters because yours isn't, you have not rolled so well in genning or in terms of what the DM throws at you. And also making a dungeon crawl more exciting than just listening at the door and barging in and fighting what's in it and then moving on to the next room.
Okay, so those are our topics tonight. So, hello Michael B and hello Phil B.
Hello.
All the bees in the house.
I'm not a bee. Except tattoo of a bee.
All the bees in the house. There you go. Now, of course, this show is brought to you by none other than... I can't pull it off the wall.
Well, you don't need to. Because...
Yes, we do, because that's the old one and it's missing people.
Oh, I thought this was a new one.
No, I swapped them. The most awesome people in the world, who are Russell Higgins, Johnny Mangina, Mark Frelthal, Amber, Brandon Fishwick, Dave Poirier, AJ, Fuke Enterprises, Nate Hanshan, Philip Bate, and Elizabeth Chipredit-Cole.
Thank you so much,
guys, for your continued support. It does mean the world to us. And Fuke is in the comments.
Thank you. Well, hello, I should say. I don't know if it's because it took so long for this pizza to come, but I feel slightly not with it. But,
we
hello,
have just
Fuke.
eaten a huge pizza, and I do kind of want to just sleep on the sofa right now.
Well...
Fuke says, hello geeks and chat, thanks for being more than RPG geeks. Haha, we did talk about board games last week.
Yes, we did.
Lots of cool things from last episode, especially how scary wasps are. Gnomes trump halflings. Well, gnomes are a similar build, so our first topic, halflings are pussies. So the original premise was raised by Lloyd Collins, who points out that he could beat up 5 or 6 children at once. Right?
Good start.
So on that basis, halflings have no place in a fight. So this kind of has episode or reminiscent of was it? Hang on, it wasn't Pippin. It was the other one in who rode to the Battle of Pelennor Fields.
That was Merry.
It was Merry, yeah.
Yeah, Pippin was in Gondor. He did then go
Yeah.
down to Pelennor Fields to find Merry.
Yes, but so what was his name? King of Rohan was all
Theoden.
Yeah, thank you. Was all you're too small to fight type thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's absolute place for that attitude to exist.
Well, just carrying on with that example, if it wasn't for Eowyn and for Merry, who are not men, then the Witch King wouldn't have died and stuff. So
yeah, it'd have been killed by a ghost.
Yes, but it wouldn't have done because symbolism and good versus evil, and the ghosts aren't good.
Yes, you have to bear in mind that in the film, it's Eowyn that kills Sauron, but in the books,
You mean the Witch King?
Witch King.
You said Sauron.
Oops. My bad.
Yes, but Merry does still stab the Witch King in the back.
Indeed.
In the
yes.
movie.
He's still part of it, but they downplayed that and gave Eowyn more of a role, which I actually agreed with. I thought that was a good change. But, exactly how tough are halflings? So I did the online quiz that was popular about 5-6 years ago, which is how many 6-year-olds can you beat up? And apparently 14.
I don't think that's a real quiz.
It was a real quiz on Facebook.
Oh, is it? Okay.
It was. A few years ago now. But apparently I can beat up 14 6-year-olds according to that quiz.
Wow.
Hello, Ronnie.
Hello,
Welcome
Ronnie.
to the chat. Nice to have you back live with us. So I was thinking about this, and there is something to be said in okay, they're small folk, therefore they're not as strong and everything else. And I have 2 lines of thinking on this. Mm-hmm. One is very simply they have different musculature, different builds.
Yes.
So you can't just think of them as 6-year-olds, maybe teenagers. But even then, there's a larger proportion of teenagers will struggle against grown adults.
Yeah.
In a fight.
I mean, I was saying to you this morning, they are sort of the height of a small teenager, but normally they're sort of middle-aged, fully grown, build, all that. And oh, there's the kitty. In the 3.5 illustration where you've got the size chart and stuff, the halfling is really muscular.
Yeah, but in Tolkien's writings, he always talked about Frodo and Bilbo. They didn't want to get involved in the fight. They tried not to. They tried hiding and escaping rather than taking anyone head on.
Yeah.
The hobbits tried not to do that. And when the hobbits went to war in the books, which wasn't covered in the film at all, I believe that they were mostly archers, fighting with the Free Peoples of the West from Bree and so on. I forget the exact name of that coalition, but they didn't fight in mass rank, but spears. Mm-hmm. Right, it kind of doesn't matter if you're small with the spear, because spears are huge. Mm-hmm. As long as you're strong enough to thrust and do harm, then that kind of counters any size disadvantage. But the other thing I wanted to bring up is, okay, so if halflings aren't as strong, and if we do kind of take that Tolkien approach of halflings being, much, much weaker than a human, like it would take a strong halfling to tackle a weak human, then surely that should be reflected in the strength score, with a much lower strength score, like down with an average of, let's say, 5 instead of 10, as an example. But when you look at D&D through all the editions, stat variance for different races is really in the 1s and 2s. You don't get like a -5 on this and a +5 on that. And the whole game mechanics would break down if you were to do that. But in a way, it would be interesting if there was an RPG which did do that and did say, no, the scale of difference is really rather large, and yet still managed to keep its mechanics working around that. Because, I mean, there are, huge disproportionate, if you like, capabilities between us and our nearest species neighbour. Mm-hmm. And yet that doesn't seem to be reflected in RPGs. The racial bonuses are very small.
Mm. And, of course, you've got your sort of stereotypical, you're going to have a halfling rogue or something that's nimble and quick. They're harder to hit because they're smaller.
Yeah, but that dex bonus, on the biggest dex bonus you get for a race in D&D is +2.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is actually not very much. But I had an interesting thought when I was looking at this size chart drawing. They've depicted, the half-orc, which is, of course, huge. Human is pretty much the same height, so it's still, tall. A halfling is more than half the size of a human, according to that picture, which makes me think, well, because of the fact, like you said, in that the bonuses are not really well varied at all, which means that, of course, halflings are still going to hit things in combat, because of course they do, if you roll well enough. Surely that means that they have to really, jump up a lot in order to get to a weak spot or get round. So
Well, this comes down to the problem that D&D really doesn't... Or shields are not as prevalent as really they ought to be.
no,
Because the thing about a shield is it covers so much. The parts of you that are exposed are your head and your feet. And so you move the shield to cover. Which is why it often takes two people to take someone down, and you can... One-on-one, you could slog each other for ages. Because the shield does cover a very large amount. And it's an impassable wall.
Yeah.
But of course, one of those targets is still very available to the halfling, and that's the feet. So, if you're working with someone, and two people are attacking one target, as long as one of them's tall, that halfling can still contribute. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of chat. Do you want to catch us up?
Yes, so Ronnie says, halflings as tough as is needed. But also, going back to Lord of the Rings for a minute, halflings are known to be very resilient creatures. And men are always depicted as very weak, very weak-willed. I suppose that's more kind of a mental stat, so, probably falling under wisdom.
I wonder what D&D would be like if you took the racial stat modifiers and multiplied them by about 4. So a +1 became a +4 and a +2 became a +8. The issue with the variant human with +1 to all stats, that's maybe got to go. You got to go for the feet option. But I think that might be an interesting variant because it will really exaggerate the difference between the races. Fuke says, children have different strengths than adults. They are wiry and nimble.
Exactly, and I think as well, a child has a kind of an innocence to them that means that they are possibly going to throw themselves in more, and therefore in some cases possibly even be stronger than, say, a cynical adult who, tries to strike but has, something.
I think it depends on the situation, I mean, if you put me, personally, into a battle of the medieval period, I would be useless because I am that cynical person that doesn't want to fight and doesn't really see much purpose in war in the modern world. It's just serving somebody who's rich. But right, that's our front door, which means our Tesco delivery's come. So I've got to take this by myself for a little bit, and I don't necessarily completely agree with Jason's point there, but he's not in the room now, so I won't destroy him. Instead, I will catch up on chat. So Michael B says, if you want to compare to other reality, look to apes. Chimps are much smaller than humans, but are stronger than humans. Same for orangutans. And this was kind of, one of the things I found interesting, with the whole, yes, they're smaller, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're weaker, which was my sort of first instinct, different musculature. So he follows up by saying, so size does not match to strength, and indeed it doesn't. Ronnie says, you could perhaps get round the +5 -5 thing by making strength -5 and perhaps con and or dex having a total of +5 between them. Fuke says, also children don't fight fair. Well, that's true. Ronnie says, what I mean is the +5 could be gotten through a combination of other stats. Well, I just think, if you're going to change D&D particularly, I don't think I'd start putting in -5s everywhere. But I think if you take the existing stat modifiers and just amplify them, the ×3 or ×4, that might be an interesting variation on doing, racial bonuses. It might be interesting because every race basically has a +2 and a +1, with the exception of human. Where you either get +1 to everything, or is it +1 in 2 stats and a feat? And so I suppose then you've got to ask yourself the question, is a feat really worth +4? I think everyone's going to play a non-human in that game. So maybe they need 3 stats at +1 or something. I don't know. Anyway. So I don't necessarily agree with the original argument, but I do think there is something worth exploring there. And maybe 5e isn't the right system. Maybe there isn't currently a right system to explore this idea with. Because when you start changing the numbers by that amount, you start fundamentally altering the game mechanics. But I think it would definitely be interesting to see a system come along where the differences in races really are rather extreme. I was reading earlier today just about Wojtek the bear from World War II, as with the Polish 72nd something or other in World War II, and this bear was sort of raised from a child and became the company mascot for 22nd Company, and actually saw battle. A brown bear saw battle, carried ammunition to the front lines. Now, it didn't actually kill any Germans or fight directly one-on-one, but it was taking part as an artillery company and was carrying ammo to the front lines and carrying 4 times as much ammo as any human could, because it was a bear. And that kind of difference is really not represented in current RPGs that I can think of. So Fuke says, how did Twilight Imperium go last weekend? Semi-related, unlike negatives of 3.5 D&D. Hello N20. I'll read your comment out in just a moment. So, Twilight Imperium game last weekend, I won. I won by quite a large margin. Everyone on the board attacked me on the 3rd turn. And it kind of got worse from there, really. The end of the game, there were war suns coming, my empire was vanishing. But I was still scoring VP, so I won. N20 says, chimps aren't stronger than humans, but they are relatively stronger. A chimp can't lift as much weight as a human. A chimp in a tug of war with a human would lose, but a chimp can suspend its own body weight far more easily than a human. Well, I don't know the specifics of chimps, but obviously an ant can lift 6 times its body weight, but at the same time, an ant, I'm just going to crush it. It's a non-contest 1-on-1, or even 1v100. I'm not sure I want to take the Facebook quiz to see how many ants I could actually take out, because I think it would be less flattering than I'd like, and probably less than my body weight. So, that's... I am tempted to explore this idea further with some homebrew rules, but I'm thinking maybe it wants a kind of a complete homebrew system rather than a D&D thing. So that might be something that I have a play with at some point. N20 says, an ant is an even better example. Amazing strength. It's amazing strength, but 1-on-1, I'm always going to win. I don't want to know how many I could do that same statement. I don't, because, when you get to a few hundred, there'll be some crawling up my legs after I've stomped them, and then I'll freak out and want to shower. I don't think it actually takes many ants to effectively get the tactical victory. Right, so that's halfling strength, and really it's more than just halfling strength. It applies to any of the attributes in any system. So when you think about elven dexterity, are humans even in the same league? And can a human percussionist even hit a drum as fast as an elf? Is it even a contest? Can you the accuracy of an elf with traditionally a bow is obviously very high, and we partly explain that by saying they've trained for 20 years with the bow because they live forever, so they can do that. I do wonder though. This is a tangent, but so reading the chat about ants now. Fuke says army ants are bloody scary. Yeah, I think my limit is 12 ants. More than that, and I might not stomp them all in 2 stomps, and I want to run away. I think there's this is a tangent, but elven lifespan, living forever, right? So we think of them as highly skilled because they can spend years and years studying a certain thing. But what kind of a life is that for the elf? Like, I'm an absolute master of archery because for the last 20 years I got up at 9 and went to bed at 5 and did archery. And I think, A, that's a really, really dull life. Like, you're always going to be doing multiple things at once. And secondly, the scale in difference of skill really isn't represented with +1, and it's another example of just how this 1 to 20 number system is, unless we've got characters with 2 and characters with 18, it's kind of too narrow. You know, and first level things are sort of tied around a kind of 60-ish% success rate, 65% success rate, and you know that's kind of universal across the board. And you know, maybe something you're really good at is a 70%. So if you think about it, what's the DC of an easy thing? Was it 10 for a very easy thing? And if your skill is, let's say you're plus nothing, right, it's not something you're particularly skilled at, that's 50-50. So if it's something you're skilled at, you're adding your proficiency bonus and your stat modifier. That could be as much as +6 at first level for the thing you're very good at. So that's basically a 4 or more to succeed. So what's that, 60? Doing math live after the day I've had not happening, 65-70% ish. So you know that's already, you know, if all of your rolls are in that 50 to 75-ish% band, where's the racial variance in that? It just isn't there. And I think if you change that, then D&D kind of almost wouldn't work. There's just like, if you used 5e as a starting point, a percentile system maybe might work. But then how do you give a human a fair chance of hitting at something? Let's say it's archery. Okay, so how do you give a human a fair chance of hitting something, but make the elf, I don't know, 10 times better, and still keep it fair in the role-playing sense? And I don't necessarily think you can. I think you've got to keep the odds of success the same, but you've got to allow the elf to be able to do things with that shot that a human cannot do. And that, I think, is why D&D isn't necessarily going to work as the system for that. So let me just catch up on chat. So Legolas in the movies seems to have a dex of 56. Yep, you're not wrong. Ant should not be able to eat to the bone in under a minute. Scary army ants. And Earmark Ordology LLC, hi! So N20 says, I played an interesting system last weekend in a game called City of Mist. There were no stat numbers at all, only descriptions. It was very cool. Yeah, those kind of narrative games have been popular now for a few years, where you know your stats are kind of narrative based. I haven't played City of Mist. Oh, excuse me. Coke coming back up to with angry vengeance. So I haven't played City of Mist, but I've played other games where you describe stats with a description rather than, you know, an actual number. And oh, looks like the shopping has been put away. So thank you very much for doing the housework there, babe. And welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
The other presenter. So we're still kind of discussing halflings, but it's almost done as a kind of topic.
Okay.
And we kind of got talking about, you know, elves and living so long, and just taking it more than just halflings on strength, but apply that same kind of thought process to, if an elf lives for millennia and spends 20 years mastering the bow, surely they're like 10 times or more better than a human with a bow. So, you know, how could that work in mechanical fairness for a player who, you know, if you give a human with a bow, what chance to hit, you know, if they've got a really bad chance to hit, and the elf gets a good chance to hit, that's unfair. You can't do that.
Yes,
You've got to keep that success range in the 50 to 75% that D&D does. So what is it that this elven ability with the bow, how is it actually going to be better than a human if it is statistically quite comparable? And I think that's got to come in the form of things like feats and abilities, like the ability to do special moves.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me, I keep going back to Lord of the Rings, but it kind of reminds me of, I think it was like a role-playing game, but essentially, yeah, if you were like an elven archer, rather than have like +5 in archery, you would have just special abilities of like expertise and stuff like that. Similarly, with people from Gondor, they had a thing against fear, so they didn't always get frightened compared to other people, and things like that. So yeah, it's way more sort of just in like an expert feat, that kind of thing, and I think it kind of separates like the normal from the elite in a way.
I think if you were to do a role-playing system that had this kind of idea behind it, I think you'd need a very extensive feat system.
Yeah, I agree.
And certainly I think that just by the intonation of that, you're kind of moving towards a higher crunch system. One of the things that was mentioned in the chat by N20 Games was the City of Mist system, where you give descriptions or narrative descriptions for your stats. And maybe that is an alternative method. But one of the things about those games is that they are, at least from a stat perspective, they can be incredibly biased towards somebody who comes up with a particularly good description.
Yes, I agree.
Or somebody who misuses a description. Now, we had that once, didn't we?
Yes,
you know
we
exactly
did.
what I'm talking about.
We still haven't forgotten on how many years ago was this.
So you can get... I mean, thing is, numbers work because they are inherently balanceable. Whereas descriptions really... They allow people who want to abuse the system to abuse it more. And that doesn't necessarily work with every group.
Yeah.
So I think if you were to sort of investigate this from a systems perspective, you're probably stuck with a numerical based system and this sort of feats approach.
I think as well, more people understand you're going to have +2 at something. Then I've got this descriptor which I can kind of apply it if I'm like if people aren't familiar with that type of system where you have an ability that is a description.
Well, those games have a certain amount of popularity, and I do quite enjoy them. But just before we move on, we are on the camera that bleaches out a little bit more, and that's probably a good thing because you do have pizza right here.
I do.
Yeah.
Oh fuck yeah.
Let's catch up a little bit on chat before we lose track of it.
Okay.
So Michael B says early D&D did limit stats based on race. Also limited class levels. Now the class levels thing sucked, I thought, back in the old days of D&D. Because there are two ways this would even be relevant to the game. If you've played a really long campaign and all of a sudden your character is useless because you can't progress, so you then either have to multiclass. And if you remember D&D's early mechanics of multiclassing and stuff, there's a whole other set of issues there. Or you were creating high-level characters, in which case you're just losing options from the game. You're just not going to have that dwarven thief or whatever.
I did like the prestige classes though from 3rd edition.
Yeah, well, they're still kind of in. So, know, I mean, it's just the problem with later editions, 3rd edition onwards, really, is that the classes became much more tropey. So this, the prestige class is kind of, it's a trope, and every trope was committed to a prestige class. So they're good in a mechanical, tactical combat kind of way, but I think they're less good for role-playing generally.
Yeah.
I've always much preferred classless mechanics myself.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I prefer the sort of the rogue class and prestige class back in 3rd edition, but I'm not that familiar with other.
Hey, Steve Ross.
Hello.
So, I mean, that's a whole separate debate in itself.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Which I'm quite happy to have. So, no, that's quite alright. We will offer one to begin with. So, like, the whole idea of prestige classes, like...
Yeah. Would you say that, for example, elven archers, is that, like, a prestige level.
Well, as D&D presents them, then it's definitely a class thing, not a race thing. You have to go right back to first edition when races were banned from certain classes. I don't think they did that in second edition, but it's very old school D&D when you had those limitations of certain races couldn't be certain classes or certain combinations of classes.
But like with your idea of, because an elf has trained for 20 years as opposed to, I don't know, 2, does that therefore mean they could be a prestige class as opposed to just normal with a few skills type thing?
Well, certainly in D&D that doesn't work, but if you were creating a system, that might be one way you could show that that particular mechanic, if or give mechanics to that particular thing, by giving a prestige class to somebody who spends X period of time studying. And it might be, if we're creating a new system here, it might well be, okay, if you add 15 years to your character's age, you can take a prestige class. And then it doesn't matter if it's elf or human, but then age becomes a stat, if you like, during character creation.
It's a bit similar in Call of Cthulhu in that if you, depending on the age, the older you get, you tend to get better at mental stats, but then worse in physical, and then vice versa.
Yeah, and if you're doing a new system, that is certainly something you can look at. But one of the issues you can face when doing stuff like that, if you were to give somebody a prestige class, if they had, 15, 20 years, whatever other mechanical effect that years thing has. But the point is, you've just given someone a prestige class, which has 2 things associated with it. Firstly, that's a bucket ton of extra skills and abilities that somebody without a prestige class doesn't have.
Yeah.
And secondly, the prestige class itself will, just by the nature of what those things are, it narrows that character down to a trope. And when you look at character creation, one of the things that, like, if you go through all the process of any sort of modern RPG, whether it's 5e or Fate Forge, or I assume Pathfinder 2nd Edition, I haven't had a chance to read that one yet. I haven't brought it in yet because I'm still reading Fate Forge, but I will get that one to look at because there's some things I quite like the sound of. But when you are going through the character generation process, every part of the character generation makes some degree of sense as to either establishing who the character is or who they were, until you get to classes. And classes don't really fit in a medieval world in a non-adventuring sense. It's like, if you're not an adventurer, what purpose does an assassin, a rogue, a paladin, a ranger, a monk, what purpose do these really have? They don't feel part of the world to suddenly become you're now a fighter. Until you become an adventurer. So how have you got skills at first level relating to these classes? They don't feel backgroundy.
For some reason I suddenly thought of Absurd, because Absurd had background and yet he didn't. Because the broken character.
Yes, well, we're referring here to another podcaster's crazy character when they started a 13th level campaign, and the player in question realised that there are 13 classes in the game and you can work the rest out from there. The character's name was absurd. So, let's catch up briefly on chat.
Yes.
I don't want it to go off screen. So N20 says, "It is interesting to think about all that experience. Imagine if a human played piano for 100 years without losing any skill to the deterioration of
I was going to say, if you play the piano for 100 years, you probably get RSI.
Seriously, RSI. You do anything for 100 years, you're going to have
your fingers will get very brittle.
That means elves must have a very different arrangement of ligament and muscle. Very different muscle memory.
Yeah.
So, I think we need to autopsy an elf.
Yes.
Okay, any volunteers? Please let us know. Fugue says, prestige classes for the win! And hello, RLL.
Hello!
I'm looking at the Ice Middle-earth RPG. Hobbits have plus 20 strength
minus
modifiers
20, I think that says.
Minus 20 strength modifiers compared to human plus 5, which is close to what you were looking for in D&D. Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. I have played the Middle-earth RPG, but it was decades ago, and I really don't remember much now.
One Ring.
Target locations. If
Oh,
I
okay.
hit location boxes.
Yeah, the two Middle Earth RPGs I played are the One Ring and Adventures in Middle Earth, which is the D&D, version of it. So the One Ring,
Here.
careful.
Nearly lost the dice.
Yeah.
It's still in there.
Yes, they're still in there. So that essentially, you've got quite a lot of skills. You get certain perks depending on what kind of, not race, but it's more like a culture. Be careful because they're old, those books. They were like some of the first batch, and the glue isn't great on them. And yeah, they slowly go up. In the D&D game, it's been a while since I played it, to be honest, so apologies if I'm wrong, but I believe that you get kind of more feats and class features because you're from like Gondor, or you're from like you're a dwarf from the mountain, that kind of thing.
I was reading this at one point. There's a bookmark from a miniatures company in it.
I was going to say. So yeah, I think there is more emphasis on like traits that you have, as opposed to you get +4 this or +2 that. In fact, in the One Ring, you do have attributes, but you don't use them very often. There's only maybe 2 you use, and one's linked to the shadow, so you're going to use it, sort of shadow and corruption. So yeah, it's interesting. They don't really come into play that much.
Yeah, I mean, it still boils down to this basic question for me: is like, yes, I would love to explore this as a facet of RPG. This having these much increased differences between races, but you can't do it without keeping the gameplay fair, which is actually a topic that we're going to talk about later in the stream anyway, so maybe we'll come back to aspects of this conversation later. But just referring to the Middle Earth bonus before, -20 and +5, which is a 25% difference, but if you think about that in D20 terms, that's 25% is
Quite a lot,
5.
yeah.
Well, it's a lot, but it's not game-breaking difference. It's an extreme difference.
No, but it's a DC level of difference.
It's 5 different.
That's what I mean. So, in terms of DC, isn't it 5 or is it 10?
Well, I think of it as it's a 25% variance in terms of success rate.
Yeah. And
I think that's probably about as much as you can go whilst keeping the game fair. I mean, it's quite far, but I was talking earlier about the 50 to 75% success rate between an unskilled and a skilled task, and that kind of covers that full range. So, but it still doesn't necessarily feel like you're a small, like me beating up a cat. I'm gonna win, but the cat's gonna get away.
First beating up children, now you're gonna beat up cats.
There were ants in the middle as well, but
what?
You weren't in the room at the time. But
there are ants in here.
Strength-wise, the cat is never going to win, but from a dexterity perspective, I'm never going to win.
Can I please just clarify and say there are definitely no ants in this room?
There are no ants in this room.
So right. So
there was a discussion regarding the comparative strength of ants.
I'm just saying because I was bitten by a spider.
Right, let's catch up. I'm wondering, do we even need to scroll? We may have been a bit late.
No. We're fine.
This one here from
yeah.
Okay. N20 says, I always looked at class as if it were a profession.
Like you're
you
taking
learn
a
different
class.
skills and develop different stats if you want to live the life of a soldier than you would if you happen to be a mage. I mean, class can come into background to you justify it in that way, but it always feels kind of shoehorned onto the background to me. It never really feels as it never really feels right. It's almost that and it's almost like, well, hang on a minute. So you've got these 6. Let's say you've got a party of 6 adventurers, and there's 6 different classes. But from that point on, they are adventurers.
Mm-hmm.
So why do they gain levels in their previous profession? Surely what should happen is they become level 2 adventurers.
Yeah, but
That's how a class just doesn't feel
yeah.
right. Anyway, Elf Autopsy, your next video.
How exactly? We
Again,
haven't got an elf.
I just need a volunteer.
What, to wear pointy ears and then be stabbed and stuff?
What, a LARP autopsy.
Wow. Actually, we do know somebody with elf ears, so he's quite close by.
I'd rather not autopsy her. So, RLL says the Ice Middle-earth game contains a 1985 copyright sign. Ooh, that is
Making me feel very young.
It's out of copyright.
I thought it...
25 years.
Oh, well, that's very different from music copyright, where the composer has to be like dead for 60 years type thing.
Oh gosh, has it got caught up with Mickey Mouse though? That's the thing. It might have got caught up with the Mickey Mouse stuff. In which case, I don't know anymore. Copyright's got complicated. Screw you, Disney.
However, N20 says, I like the Warhammer fantasy level progression. It was like a career path. At least it was years ago when I played it. Well, N20 Games, I have news for you. Pass me the Warhammer book.
I'm looking for it.
It's right there where I'm pointing.
This one.
Yes. Could you not see it because of your hat? 4th edition! Like 2nd edition, but presumably more refined. I haven't read the whole thing yet, but yes, careers. You can do careers in here and everything. No. From Cubicle 7. Exciting. I did an exciting interview about it.
What did Dom say about this new edition?
There's a few nice tweaks, but it is really sticking to the roots, especially as it was his first system that he ever played, old Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, and he basically wanted to kind of bring it up to this generation, if you will, so like the people who played D&D 5th and everything like that.
The art style is like 5th edition, but the theme is Warhammer, so that's quite interesting.
I would disagree about the art style.
Well, it depends. When you've got...
No, that's
not a 5e.
Very, very
Sorry.
Warhammer.
There were a couple of images that I saw at the time I said that looked like they could just as easily be in the 5e
they pop
book.
a lot. But yeah, the point is that Warhammer has careers, so you don't have classes, and they're literally all kinds of things. You could be a rat catcher, you could be a barber, you could be a bounty hunter.
This is what I mean. Careers makes more sense to me than classes.
I really, really like careers because
that's why I like classless systems.
What I love is that you start out with a really shit career. Like, you are unbelievably... Not rubbish, but you are a lowlife. So something like a barber is, pretty good.
How long's this been in there?
Since forever. Yeah, I knew about that. It's a silent death book.
I was looking for that a year ago.
Oh, okay. But yeah, anyway, so you start off with a really rubbish career, and you have, like, a few little, perks. So it's very kind of low fantasy. But the satisfaction when you progress. So you start off, in your first career, and then there are certain paths that you can go on depending on what you start with. So, for example, I played an apprentice wizard as my first career. So naturally, I'm going to go on some kind of wizarding path, and then the next step would be a journeyman wizard, where you start specializing in a certain thing. So I wanted to be a light wizard.
Okay.
And then you eventually get to be a super badass. I can't remember exactly what it's called, but you are basically a super wizard as your like final career step. I just remember the picture. It kind of looks a bit like Unlimited Power, Palpatine, sort of thing like that. And the apprentice wizard is like little like, I'm just little apprentice to like super powerful. But I've never played a super powerful career in Warhammer.
It reminds me a little bit of Traveller. And I know that's the thing they've kept in Traveller, because I was speaking to Matthew Strange about that this last year. Around this time, actually. Ish. Like in first edition Traveller, that I've played a fair amount over the years. the you choose a career in a very similar vein to Warhammer, except I think Traveller may have come out before Warhammer back in the day.
Yeah,
They're
probably.
both, well, I don't know. The original Warhammers. I think it
that's
even
the
predates
80s.
me in RPGs. Maybe not actually.
No, I don't think so. I think it was the 80s still.
Yeah, I got into RPGs in the 80s,
Mm-hmm.
late 80s. So, anyway, so what I was saying was, so yeah, you have that whole career thing, but where original Traveller really showed its age now, we just couldn't consider this now. Even then, it was a bit strange.
Mm-hmm.
You could die in character gen.
Yes.
Now,
I
in
have
the
heard
modern
about
system, they've rethought that a lot. So you still get these same kind of critical failures that can happen. If you stay in a career path that is dangerous, you can still have disaster happen. But what you get now instead is medical debt. So you can begin the game with medical debt.
Okay.
And there are several ways you can handle that depending on the type of game you want to play, in terms of what you do about that. But yeah, we're quite a way behind on chat.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking it might be time for my break.
Okay.
Are you okay with that?
Yeah,
And I'll
yeah,
just,
yeah. I've got a little bit more anyway to say about the Warhammer, so.
I'll be right back.
And please don't spill anything this week.
Oh my god, that was one time it was your fault.
Apparently it was my fault.
Yeah, we've established that because you blame me.
Okay. But yeah, another thing I like about the career system, and where I do agree with Becky about the whole classes kind of being a trope, and I do actually find classes sometimes quite difficult to roleplay because my mind is kind of stuck in the, oh yes, mechanically speaking, the class can do this, da da da. Whereas with a career, there's quite a lot of social things involved in it, whether it's actual sort of traits or stats you have where it's like, oh yes, you can be recognized or be more likely to talk or mingle with somebody higher up or whatever, whereas if you're, in your starting career, of course I'm not going to talk to you, peasant, something like that. Reminds me a little bit of Corporation, but Corporation in that way is a bit more numbers based, in that depending on your rank as an agent, you will basically be respected by certain people if your rank is higher. If your rank is quite low and you speak to somebody or interacting with, say, a level, not a level, but a rank 5 agent, they're going to be like, no, get me some coffee type thing. So, yeah, there's that's quite sort of a simple version, but yeah, there's a lot more social stuff, and it kind of creates a social class as well, in that if you're a rat catcher or somebody who works shoving shit quite literally in Warhammer, you can do that. That's like the lowest of the low, like you're surrounded by filth, disease, like with rat catchers. Also there's for example, a species called Skaven, which is like a rat, like a big sort of rat creature, so I'm sure rat catchers get involved in that, so lots of risks involved. Of course, somebody in fancy attire is not going to talk to a rat catcher because that's their social status. But if, say, you were a barber, so you're a little bit more up there, you did more of a, almost like a, dare I say it, a customer service job or customer facing, then you're gonna be able to talk better to people. So there's all these like little subtle role-playing traits that come in. So that's why I prefer careers overall. But anyway, oh my god, let's go back up here to where. Okay, hello Scott Poe. Yes, you are late. But that's all good. We were a bit late too because pizza was late. N20 says, great point about leveling. Once the characters are adventuring, their development should be very similar. Yeah, that is true. I'm sure there is a system who? I'm sure there's a system that does that. It kind of rings a bell, as in like you progress. You've got like a group level. I'm just trying to think. It might be either Lord of the Rings or something like that. Maybe. Where you kind of you level up the group as a whole as well as your own class. I think maybe it might be. I don't know. I'm gonna have to check that. But at least one system rings a bell with that. Steve Ross says, I always consider classes as an indicator as to what type of work that character does. Call of Cthulhu 3rd edition was good, as was Warhammer Fantasy. I've not played 3rd edition Cthulhu. Hello, babe.
Hello. Is Scott Poe here yet?
Yes, Scott Poe is late, quote-unquote, fudge.
That I heard.
But yeah, Call of Cthulhu is similar in that you have your occupation, which, is your career. You don't really change it, though, in the same way as Warhammer. You just kind of get better at your occupation. Or I suppose if you wanted to do it for story, you could say, oh, yes, I used to be, I don't know, a police detective, but then I became a doctor, sort of thing, something like that. N20 says, woohoo, that is very exciting, thank you for sharing. Yes, I still haven't read the book, but it looks so good, and it was a real delight talking to Dom. I almost said Tom then, but to Dom. We are going to be broadcasting the interview, along with many other interviews, at Complus 2, so you'll be able to see lots of new stuff from sponsors. Also some Paizo stuff, since we've already mentioned that tonight. Oh, I've gone too quickly.
You just picked up the Warhammer starter set this week.
Oh,
and
fantastic!
As though it still has career paths.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
They're all there.
Fundamental to Warhammer.
Yeah. It, like 4th edition is almost exactly the same as 2nd edition. There's a bit of 1st in there as well, so it's kind of like a nice amalgamation. But yeah, it's really only little tiny tweaks and refinements in there. So if you're familiar with 1st or 2nd edition, then you're going to like 4th. There's no big changes like there was with 5th edition D&D, for example.
N20 is buggered off to play board games, which I suppose is acceptable.
Yeah, as long as you're streaming it at your FLGS. I'm just saying.
N20 is wishing everyone a good weekend.
Have a good evening.
We'll catch up with the rest of the video when it goes up on your channel, which it does within usually 10-20 minutes of the end of the stream.
Yeah.
YouTube just does some processing on the video and then it goes up. So, and yes, everything you just explained was what I loved about Warhammer. Thanks again. Because I missed most of that.
Yeah, I do miss Warhammer, and I'm kind of keen on running some Warhammer when it's my next go.
Scott Poe has said shots time. Is there a drinking game to Pear of Geeks I don't know about?
I have not mentioned alcohol once, which is strange for me, because normally I talk about beer at least once, but
Especially
no.
as our favourite beer has just come in at a local shop.
Oh my goodness
going to buy
me.
as much as we can tomorrow.
I asked them to hold them all behind the counter and they laughed. I'm like, no, I'm being serious. But no, I've not once mentioned shots. Fuke says...
Is this some...
I wasn't going to mention that because I don't know either. I'm very old. However, Fuke is starting work. Have fun with your lattes and other coffees and things. Oh, and Steve has said that Warhammer was originally published in 1986.
Which would have been...
the 80s.
I'm just working it out. Just a couple of years before I started role-playing.
Ah.
But I'm not sure when Traveller was first published. Can we look that one up?
Sure. Can somebody Google Traveller? I'm sure that was a bit earlier.
I think it was.
Like 1982 or something.
Judging by the art.
yeah. But yeah, Phil says the Warhammer Fantasy starter set looks good. Yeah, I saw it at the expo. The thing is, I much prefer getting like the core book, but it had some lovely things in there, and I was a bit disappointed. There was like this little supplement in there, but it was only available in the starter set. I can't remember exactly which city it was, but it was about a specific city, like Bogenhafen or something like that, and I really wanted it, and it's like, oh, it's in the starter set. But never mind. Starter sets are still good.
Talking of conventions...
Yes!
Our friends at Angry Frog Gaming are behind a convention that you can attend if you're anywhere near Scotland.
Mm-hmm. It's in Perth. It's called Tabletop Scotland. It's in its second year. And, it's kind of blown up quite big. It's not a massive convention, but it's
in
certainly,
the media bracket.
it's certainly established now. I had a quick chat with the founder and main organizer, Dave, who is basically up to his eyeballs at the moment planning everything, but it's set to look, really great again. They do board games. They do role-playing games, of course. I don't know if they're doing other things this year.
They have a reasonable trade hall.
They have a trade hall. I think they might be doing a couple of seminars this year. I'm not sure. But Angry Frog Gaming, they are basically like a podcast, and they do all the media stuff there. So that's kind of their thing.
RLL says 1977,
1977.
for Traveller, which I was very young. And that's just got me wondering, when did this come out?
People
This is
Irontown
Enterprises. 1990 for this. But this is a derivative game from the alternative to Traveller back in the day. Was this game called... I'm just trying to remember the name of it. It was the... Right, Rollmaster had a space equivalent, which I think was it Space Master? I'm trying to remember. There was a spaceship equivalent, and this is the game system that has books of critical tables. And this was because they produced miniatures for the spaceship game for the spaceships. What they decided was, they'll put a little one-page A4 sheet of rules in with the miniatures for a little spaceship game you could play. So they started writing the rules, and it ended up as a book that is, let's see, how many pages is this? 32 pages long. So it ended up as a box game, and it was a little spaceship combat game, which my brother and I used to really love when we were young. He used to thrash me. Now I thrash him.
So Scott has explained about the shots. Becky mentioned a break. Jason mentioned don't spill. I just DM'd it into being shots. I see. RLL says it is Space Master.
Space Master.
That's Steve. And Merp is the cut down version of Rollmaster with the Tolkien license. Yes, I'm sure I knew that, but then forgot. We have not talked about another convention.
No,
coming up, which
so
I'm particularly excited
we didn't
about.
actually give the date for Tabletop Scotland, which is 2 Saturdays' time. So tomorrow, a week Saturday, as we Brits say, which Americans would say 2 Saturdays' time. They don't have the concept of a week. Saturday.
I would say a week on
Saturday.
Saturday.
On Saturday,
yeah.
If said more completely, which basically means you get to Saturday and then go to the next one. I remember years and years ago when I played EverQuest, I arranged this guild war between my guild and another guild just for a laugh, friendly thing, where we were going to fight each other PvP style.
Oh, and what, they turned up in the wrong week or something?
They turned up a week early because we'd said a week Saturday.
Oops.
Yeah, that was a boo-boo. So when we did eventually get it together, they thrashed us.
Huh.
But it was lots of fun. So... yeah, a week after that.
Yeah,
so 2 weeks on Saturday.
Scott is suggesting Complus. No, we can talk about that in a minute, though. But no, there is a convention which is in its 3rd year, which I can finally turn up to because I do not work on Saturday mornings anymore, which is Fighting Fantasy Fest, which Jonathan Green mainly organises, as well as various other people. We have got Ollie, who does all the sort of Weirding Woods stuff, and he is one of our sponsors for Complus. So he's
Jonathan Green.
Actually, yes, that's a point. He's also a sponsor. So Ollie's going to be doing what looks like a really awesome real-life experience of House of Hell, which is one of the most notorious fighting fantasy books ever.
That reminds me, actually, we do need to get in touch with a certain Ian's publisher to pick up the prizes.
Yeah. Having said that, Ian Livingstone and Steve Jackson will be there, as well as various other of the big sort of illustrators of the series.
Not actually met Steve Jackson.
No, we haven't.
Spoken to Ian several times,
but not Steve.
Since we started running Complus, bumped into Ian a number of times. Never bumped into Steve.
No. Also, Atlantis Miniatures, who is also one of our sponsors for the con, are releasing specifically fighting fantasy miniatures, which I'm very excited about. Not so bothered about getting all of them because they might be quite pricey, but definitely at least a few. So Zagor, the cool little worm thing on the Death Trap dungeon cover. You've got Zambar Bone. You've got
saying words. I don't know what these mean.
yeah, but if you
But I
don't
will
find
say
it
this
fancy, you'll
about
know.
Atlantis Miniatures. Now, Atlantis Miniatures, they do resin sculpt or resin casts of their minis, so they are on the expensive side.
Yes, that's
if
why I
looking at
thought,
miniatures.
okay, I better not get all of them.
But I have to say, they are amongst some of the best minis and most characterful minis I've seen. They are really, really amazing sculpts. Incredible.
Yeah, these look
levels
great.
of detail. I only own the one at the moment, but they are truly stunning miniatures.
They look really, really detailed.
And they're sponsoring Con+, and we're giving away quite a few of them. It's a few $100 worth there, so
Yes.
do tune into the telethon.
Absolutely.
Another
and
one
there's
of our sponsors is at Fighting Fantasy Fest as well.
which one?
Andy, D&B Games.
Oh yes, that's right. D&B Games is going to be there as well. So that's awesome. And there's a couple of other things happening there. Like there's the Dark Room experience. What's he called? I can't remember his name.
I don't know, but you see him come through the bar at UK Games
You can
Expo
see him from a
in his
mile
full
away.
gear, and it's, huge shoulder
Shoulder pads
and
with like
stockings
lights and new rocks.
absolutely over the top. And he's a very extroverted person.
Oh, yeah.
So he comes into the bar wearing all of his costume,
And everyone looks.
strolling through, and he goes, "Oh, don't look, everybody! It's just a man in giant shoulder pads and high heels."
Yep.
So the whole bar can hear.
Yeah,
Quite
exactly.
a character.
So yeah, he's going to be there doing a Dark Room. Then as I mentioned, we've got Ollie doing the House of Hell stuff. It's a small convention, again only in sort of third year, and it's normally about maybe 300 people. It's in Ealing in London. So if you're down south on the 31st of this month of August, we will be there as press. Oh, sorry, I just knocked your knee there. As will many Fighting Fantasy people in the community. I'm really looking forward to it.
Steve Ross is asking a question that regular viewers may already know the answer to, because I know you've mentioned this before.
Yes.
He asks, do you guys remember the Advanced Fighting Fantasy RPG game? And before you answer yes, I'm going to say no. I've never played it.
Again, like I did with N20 Games, I've got news for you. Yeah, it's not as recent as Warhammer 4th Edition, but Orion Games released, or kind of re-released, Advanced Fighting Fantasy in a second edition. And if you kind of dig back to when I had really long hair and stuff a few years ago, I basically was all over Advanced Fighting Fantasy. I really enjoyed the system. There are flaws with it, but yes, I never played it when it first kind of came out. I only read the Fighting Fantasy books, but when I realised what Advanced Fighting Fantasy was, I'm like, yeah, cool. It's role-playing. I like role-playing. Yeah, we had a good campaign with that.
Lord Morbius says hello. And he says, 8 good people watching the stream and only 4 likes. For shame, rubs fingers together. It is Lord Morbius's personal mission in life to ensure that anybody who watches the stream whilst he's on likes, subscribes, and comments.
Yes.
Scott Poe says we aren't all good. I'm not sure what it's in reference to.
Well, make yourself good and like the video.
Oh, I see. Yes, in reference to Lord Morbius. And indeed, there it is. Show some love for the hosts by clicking like and subscribe buttons. Otherwise, I shall taunt you again.
Don't forget the bell as well.
JK smiley face. What bell? Oh, the bell. Oh, yeah, this is an interesting thing with YouTube. Because I subscribe to a load of channels that I want to get more videos of. Mm-hmm. And it never shows me more videos of them.
No, because you have to click the bell now as well.
Subscribing is for our vanity, for our clock thing that we haven't got up this week for some reason.
Yep.
The thing you actually need to hit is the little bell icon, because that's what gets you notified. We don't see the subscriber count of bells. No one ever sees that.
No.
YouTube keeps it to themselves. What we see is the subscriber count. That's what's, I suppose, if you like, marketable for us. Not that we do. So yeah, it's odd how that works with YouTube. Why they separated those two functions? You'd think if you're subscribed to a channel, you want the notifications.
Indeed.
Why is this a separate function?
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, Scott Poe says, I always wait till the end to make sure the YouTuber doesn't say anything fascist.
You do know who you're watching, right?
Yeah, we're raving socialists. You're safe to hit like.
And
There's
just
no
to
fascism
clarify,
here.
that's not Venezuela. Because that's an argument some people use against socialism.
Right. Venezuela is communist, isn't it? Autocratic communist.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah, that's something else.
Mm-hmm. But just to clarify before anyone goes, oh, it's like Venezuela. Anyway.
Yes, everyone says, oh, socialism doesn't work, look at Russia. You know, that's communism.
Yeah, as somebody who learnt about communism in history, whenever anyone mixes socialism and communism up, I'm just like...
No!
Brain
I'm
does
at
not
least
compute.
a millimetre to the right of that. I believe in freedom.
Yeah, at least.
Right, so anyway, next topic.
Which one would you like to do next?
What one's next on the list? We have it on the back of a pizza receipt.
Yes, we've got meaty pizza with extra mushrooms.
Ugh, definitely yours.
Yes, it's lovely. So, balance of play.
Now this is interesting because the original question is actually this kind of question was inspired by a thread that was in the D&D 5e group.
In Reddit.
No, Facebook, that one.
No, the balance one was Reddit.
You're right, that was in Reddit.
Mm.
Now, the original question was, how do you deal with one player's having a lot more experience, essentially being higher level than others?
Yeah, how they phrased it as, how do you not get left behind?
Yeah. And, I know some groups do track XP on individual characters, which I suggest against doing. Even if you're playing an old school system where you get XP per kill, don't if a player's there for a session, give them XP for the session. Share that amongst everyone, because otherwise you encourage a kind of play that's kind of adversarial between players. So that's the first point to make. Now, I know some groups do have anyone who's not there, who doesn't attend, doesn't get XP, as it's a kind of an incentive to turn up. You'll only get the XP if you arrive. And so you can get a situation where a player's fallen behind. But more often, this same issue crops up because of a disparity in power between two characters.
Yeah.
That can actually happen even if you've got the same XP. If one person's read the book and knows how to build a character and just has that understanding of mechanics to get the most out of their character, then they're always going to be able to do more damage than someone who hasn't got that experience and that understanding of the game mechanics.
Yeah, or if you get XP for loot, you could have a rogue that puts loads into like perception and things like that. Make sure you get.
There's all sorts of ways it can happen. It's a form of power play, but it's kind of an innocent one.
Yeah.
Because if you know the system, you will intrinsically build a character with complementary skills to achieve the things you want to achieve.
You're strategizing.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that. So I've always said don't punish the players for that kind of power play, because it's natural. And actually, if anything, it should almost be encouraged, because it means the players read the rule book, for one. Isn't it nice to have players who know the rules?
Yep.
Put that into a board game context for a moment and I think you'll immediately see an answer. So, yeah, I do feel that, even if you've got the same XP, this same problem can come up. And the way to deal with it isn't really by punishing players who have done a good job of it, but by helping the less advantaged players in attaining the same level of power. Now, sometimes that might mean giving them a magic item. Help redress the balance in disparity of play. And it could well be that the characters are otherwise completely equal, but just the role player knows how to get the most out of it. So it doesn't matter what the reason is, just if things have fallen out of balance to the point it's noticeable in play, boost the less advantaged characters up by some mechanism,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's the easiest way to do it is some kind of magic item that redresses the big imbalance between them. If it's damage, give them some damage output. If it's they're dying too quick, give them some hit points somehow.
Yeah, and it's good for a DM to monitor this in the same way of like limelight, things like that.
Which is the other point I wanted to kind of raise on this. You've kind of brought it up already. You got ahead
like
of me.
read your mind.
But balance of play is in many ways more than just the balance of power between characters, but it's also the play at the table.
Yeah.
And that too needs balancing.
Yeah, but also one thing I've noticed about a lot of D&D games I've played in 5e is a lot of people forget to give out inspiration.
Yeah.
And it's always just because you do something really memorable. It's nothing to do with, oh yes, you followed your roleplay trait here, so therefore I'm giving you inspiration. I've never seen a DM actually bother to do that.
Well, it's so hard because the problem is that
I've done it too.
That kind of encouragement to roleplay well can only happen when two things occur. Firstly, somebody actually roleplays.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yes.
So it could be the case that it never comes up. No, I've had a group where I was looking to do that, and I never found the opportunity to reward good roleplay.
Okay.
So how do you kind of help train the players when they've got no basis to start from?
I think with that question, I would kind of offer it as an incentive rather than just wait until they've done it. So I would say something like, oh, well, you can have inspiration if you explain why you're doing that, or something like that, rather than wait for them to do this big speech and then say, oh yes, fantastic, here's some inspiration.
And that's a really good approach in the sense of being asked for specific information, because if you say, if you role play well in the next scene, I'll give you inspiration, but then you don't give inspiration out, you've just kind of punched your friends in the face without using your fist. So no, that kind of very specific circumstance I think is actually a really good idea. It's something I might even try.
Keep tabs as well on who's got inspiration, who hasn't, or how many times you've given somebody inspiration, because you, again, kind of like the limelight, you might think, oh, this person's role playing a lot and I'm actually giving them inspiration.
That's kind of the point of inspiration, though. It's okay if the same player gets it a lot, because you can only have one lot of inspiration.
Yes, but in terms of what you were saying about if somebody, is not as powerful or not as balanced as others, you could try and bring that up by giving them maybe more, or...
I don't know if that's the right place for it. Inspiration's intent in the rules is to be a carrot.
Yes, it is a carrot.
And
it's a very nice carrot.
I think if you try to use it for game balancing purposes, you might find yourself giving out inspiration for very ridiculous reasons.
Yeah. It's funny, you've got inspiration for the carrot and exhaustion for the stick. Well, you
I don't know if they're the opposite ends of the same thing.
They kind of are, because inspiration is advantage, and then, at least to start with, exhaustion is disadvantage.
I suppose.
Yes, it is.
Although inspiration isn't worded, I think, in the rules as advantage, if I recall. It is worded as a reroll.
No, it's advantage.
Is it?
It's definitely advantage. So you roll 2d20s.
Because can't you do it after the dice is rolled?
No.
You make your roll and then decide you're going to use inspiration on it.
Well, maybe you do, but it's definitely you roll.
In theory, if that's the case, and you're already rolling with advantage, maybe you roll both dice.
You roll well, that's what I do. You roll 2 dice and you take the highest.
That's advantage. Could somebody clarify this in the rules? Like, if you...
That's the way I've always done it.
Well, whenever we use inspiration, it's always you roll the dice. You go, can I use advantage on that?
No, I've never done that.
Oh no, you're right. You do it beforehand.
Yeah, you have
to.
That's why I always declare I will use my inspiration, and then you roll 2 dice.
Yes, it's
and
something you really want to succeed on, isn't it?
And then you get a 2 and a 4.
Yeah. So no, you're absolutely right.
We're losing track of the chat.
Well, we'll catch up in a minute. But one of the things with inspiration is that players, much like healing potions, players tend to hoard it. And I
Yes.
think if you get in the habit of giving inspiration out, irrespective of when players have got it or not, they'll start spending it more, which I think is a good thing.
Well, the thing about
Then it gets them
inspiration,
to want it back again.
you can't hoard inspiration. At least
Exactly.
you've only got one
You should
point
only
or
have
no
it
point.
once. So if you're giving it out to somebody again and they've already got it, but they've not yet used their inspiration because they were saving it till something mattered, then
Then they can't have it
that's a
more.
good thing, because it will encourage them to spend it, and of course the moment they spent it, they want to earn it back. So that's, they're going to be role playing their little dice off. Let's catch up on chat.
Okay. Boom, 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 boom.
Wow, we did fall back.
Well,
So all this just happened.
we were talking about socialism. Of course, it's going to spark conversation. So Steve says he's a raging anti-authoritarian.
I can sign up to that.
And Venezuela has an oil-based economy and a powerful enemy in the US who can't spell. Oh, I see what you mean, as in, right, Trump who can't spell. Of course he can't. Kofefe. Scott Poe says that's okay for some reason.
I'm, I guess, agreeing to the politics. Lord Morbius says, I could never be socialist because I could bring myself to trust politicians not to be corrupt. Actually, I should just say I could never trust government at all. Yeah, I mean, it is one argument that... I don't want to get too political, but I'll say a lot of people say, oh yes, all politicians are the same, and, it's power that corrupts, and I disagree with the statement. The system is designed to corrupt politicians, but it doesn't mean the politician has to become corrupted. For example, there is no such thing as democracy in a country with freedom of the press and a free market, because your free press has to be a business. So and consequently, it's always owned by rich people. Therefore, your press is always biased towards wealth, and when you got the free market, and free press, you essentially always have a government that has to sell out in order to buy the ad space in order to get elected, and that is a self-sustaining system of plutocracy, which is what we have in the West. We have a plutocratic system. Let's tie that into role playing. I've said before, look at different types of
XP,
government
that's
for
kind
role-play.
of riches and stuff.
XP is always shared between the players. Yes, regardless of who killed the monster or got the treasure, the party should be at the same level.
Yeah, there's plenty of games I've been in where the DM just says you will all level up at the same time.
The majority.
Yeah, I do that as well.
But it was an old school thing where you used to...
Yeah.
Even if you split it between the party, you used to calculate the XP
Yeah,
for the kill.
Yeah,
But
that's right.
I am aware of groups that will not give XP to a character that isn't present.
Yeah.
Which I can understand that, and I like the idea of, okay, your character died, you start again at first level. I just hate the reality. So anyway, where are we up to?
We're at Steve saying, yeah, but that could mean lazy players get rewarded for just tagging along and doing nothing.
Which, if you think of XP as a reward, yes. But if you think of it as an individual reward, but it isn't. The XP, it's a form of character arc. And it kind of replaces the direct need for character arc in a narrative. If you think of a role-playing game as a story, the characters must evolve.
Indeed.
And because it's a story, they must have an arc. But because role players don't necessarily bring character with arc to their stories, which I actually think is something that is worth doing, but mechanically, role-playing games have always had built in this mechanical form of character arc. And that's what XP is. When you think of it as a reward, then yes, absolutely, that's how you can get disparity of levels but within characters within the group, by treating it as a reward. And because players generally want their characters to level, they've generally got goals in mind of things they want to get at certain levels, and so yes, it does feel like a reward to get a level to some extent.
Yeah.
But I always say be wary of the Skinner box. It's a psychological trick of, you get like notifications on your phone are designed as a Skinner box and things. games are designed around this psychological trick. Are you familiar with the Skinner box?
No.
Okay,
Can you
so the monkey
explain
presses the button, gets a banana.
Yes.
Realises, I press the button, I get a banana.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, this is fantastic. So it's now been trained to press the button.
Mm-hmm.
Now, make the bananas happen every second time.
Mm-hmm.
Does that increase frustration? No. The monkey starts to enjoy pressing the button.
Mm-hmm.
Because now it's starting to gamify. So then you make it give bananas less rarely.
Mm-hmm.
And less rarely. And you don't need to give the banana as often.
You mean more rarely?
More rarely, yes. Yeah. So the bananas come out less frequently.
Yeah.
Right? By this point, the monkey is now addicted.
Mm-hmm.
And cannot stop pressing the button just to see if a banana comes out,
Mm-hmm.
even if they want one or not. And that's Skinner box. And that's kind of what levels are in RPGs. They're kind of a form of Skinner box.
Well, think about the sort of those like MMOs where you go around, you grind.
Yeah, Skinner box.
And yeah, you fight and fight, you get bits of XP.
That's not just me applying a psychological precept to that bit of game design.
Mm-hmm.
That is actually game designers that said, let's introduce a Skinner box. How can we do it?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, look, let's use an XP leveling mechanic. It started with the psychological concept.
Wow.
In the early MMOs. It genuinely did.
Yeah, but even when there's no role playing involved at all, and you've got like your XP, and you know that's going to bring you a level, even that, it's almost like a kind of a status thing of, oh yes, I'm level 55, something like that, and oh, you're level 2. There's that kind of. There's like a status of feeling good, of I'm a high level, I've got powers, I've got more abilities, and
players in Adventurers
stronger.
League and Pathfinder Society definitely sort of mention the level of their character more, because that's a kind of official play type thing.
Yes.
And so if you've got to level 16, then you've kind of got this status that isn't. I can't just roll up a level 16 character in Adventurers League. I have to start at level 1 and earn my way up. But it's not hard to do in Adventurers League or Pathfinder Society, because they never kill anyone, so you just got to kind of turn up.
Okay.
And that's the way those things work. Because, if you kill a character, you're potentially losing a customer.
Oh, I thought you meant like anything, like an NPC.
I'm talking about organised play. No, as a PC. And I noticed those players do tend to be quite proud of the level, but I think for those people who play in a social group, you for the vast majority of that, once you've done a few campaigns, you will have at some point just generated high-level characters for a high-level campaign, and you start to... Level becomes more about where's the game most enjoyable. And the answer is below 12, by the way, in 5th edition. And you start doing the game where it's most fun, which usually you start somewhere between 2nd and 4th, because that's where it's more fun to start. You can have a bit of progression, and then you end before the game gets too grindy as it does in the high level. So this, the idea of level as a reward is really, it's not, because you only want to give out X number of levels before the campaign ends, because the game sucks when you go beyond a certain point. And that's kind of true of most systems, to be honest. There's always a sweet spot in levels somewhere where there's just enough complexity, but not too much. And, and power eventually just gets too much. Games ultimately break, like they did with your final
Fighting
Fantasy
yes.
game. So, that's the... I just don't think of levels as a reward, ultimately, is where I'm getting to. And it's about character arc for me. So I don't see the problem. If somebody doesn't turn up for a session, I'm not going to penalise them and make them always level up a session later because they didn't turn up to one session. Most of our players come to every session, so yeah.
I had a Facebook open.
We apparently have a Facebook open. There's chimes.
Oh dear. Let me just close that there.
It's just, hopefully it's not an urgent alarm. So where are we? We were meandering for ages. So, which comment are we up to, Bill?
I was just making sure that wasn't somebody saying that the sound was off or something. So we were up to Steve going, cheers, mate. Spelt with M8. You
Yes.
got the arrow right on it.
Left is best, says Coppo. And Michael
Links
B's...
4, 3, 4.
Michael B says, RPGs are a team game, not individual competition. Couldn't agree more. Lord Morbius says, it can be an individual game if you only have one player and a GM. I've done that on occasion. We do that in the car sometimes. We have actually quite an interesting game system.
Well, you do, because you made it up.
Oh, we play it.
Yeah, but you made it up.
Okay.
Credit goes to you.
I can't remember when it was. It was a long drive somewhere, and I said, should we play an RPG? And you were going, but how? And I said, but all we need is a mechanism for random numbers, and that's built into car number plates.
Hey.
So as we're driving up the motorway, I find it easy to... I do struggle to play as the driver of the car. I find it a lot easier to
really
GM.
Interesting, because...
Well, because when you're a player, you're solving a puzzle. When you're a GM, you only have to think of that once. And that inspiration can strike at any time. It might just even be a story already thought of. Whereas as a player, you're having to actively digest things and understand a plot and reverse engineer things. And I actually find that's a lot... On a one-on-one game, the player is more mentally engaged.
Oh yeah, I would agree with that. But I mean, you're driving, so I just find it astonishing you can DM when you're driving. I certainly couldn't.
Well, it's not like I'm coming up with like the most complicated things. At the end of the day, it's a game that can only be told in an hour or so because we'll arrive somewhere. So they're never the most complicated parts.
Was it Wales?
It might have been a trip to Wales, which is what 2.5 hours from.
Yeah.
So yeah. So we're going up the motorway, and basically a British number plate, the vast majority of them, they have a couple of letters, then they have a number that's either a 5 or a 6, and then they have a number that is purely random 0 to 9. So we take that second number to be your dice roll. So obviously 9 is great. I can't remember if 0 is 10.
0 is 10, yeah.
0 is 10. So 6 or more is generally a success, unless it's a hard thing, which would go for 7 or 8. But there's 2 quirks of British number plates that we use. So it's quite common to see 6 or 5 for reasons of number plate logistics that aren't that relevant. Basically, was the car made in the 2000s or the 2010s?
Oh, okay.
So these 2 numbers are quite common. So we have 5 being a critical failure and 6 being critical success. And it's a cool system. We generally play Corporation because that's a D10 based system, and we do these little one-on-one adventures in the car, which are quite fun sometimes. Not every long trip, but you know. So where are we up to?
Michael B says yes, but as a mindset of how to DM a game, it is a team game, even if it's a team of 1.
Yeah.
And Lord Morby says, yeah, I'll give you that point.
We all agree. Steve Ross says, one-on-one sessions are quite intense, but can be incredibly enjoyable.
My very first D&D game was a one-on-one.
Yeah? You have to work faster as a DM, in the sense of, you can't just set up an encounter and then you've got half an hour to think of something else by the time the players get through it, because everyone taking their turn and so on. You get through the story quicker, but, and in some ways you could argue it could be almost a longer story, but I guess because of how we tend to do it in the car, you're only going for like hour and a half or something. I mean, I think it gets to a point when you're driving where, we take regular breaks and stuff driving anyway, and so you're kind of doing like little half-hour stints. And then you might do a half-hour stint, we take a break at a service station, and then when we resume, we might not resume the adventure straight away, and then after the next services, we might do the next half-hour type thing. And that gives me a chance to think of the next things to happen and stuff as we go aimlessly down the boring motorway, thinking our left-wing thoughts. What about Doom, then? What, the PC game? Or There was an RPG,
Well,
wasn't there?
Steve says underneath, oops, wrong system, that's Conan.
But now I'm very confused. Are we talking about Doom or Conan?
Well, I don't know, because Conan is now a Modiphius system,
They're a
so
sponsor.
2D20.
Didn't we give away a really special limited edition?
Yes, we
Conan
did.
last
It
week?
was a
Yeah.
beautiful leather thing.
Signed as well.
Maybe
wasn't
maybe because we're so far back in the chat. Maybe Steve thought we were going to be talking about Conan or Doom because of the 2D20 thing.
it? Oh,
Maybe.
I don't know. We
Lord
are
Morbis
behind.
says 10 days without food or water, or 30 minutes without internet access. I think I'd go with the 30 minutes without internet access, frankly.
Yeah. Yeah, because like that happens a lot, and we just switched to 3G. Not impacted.
Scott says food, water, shelter, Wi-Fi.
Hey, it's officially part of Maslow's hierarchy of needs
Well,
these days.
I was going to say in Scandinavia, Wi-Fi and broadband is a human right,
Yeah.
because I mean the Western world can't function without it now.
Oh, is Russell Higgins here? Because there's a Hola Russell. Did we skip his message?
Hola, Russell. I don't know. I didn't see. Oh,
Russell Higgins.
oh, hello. Hola from the beach. I am on vacay.
Whoa, that's kind of cool. We're broadcasting
But
to a beach somewhere in the world.
I love though how he had to say vacay. I'm on
So middle
vacay.
class, yeah.
It's so smug. Look at me, I'm on vacay. No, I'm sure it's lovely on the beach.
I'm in the beach too. There's just not ocean in Arizona.
Well, yeah, I was going to say you'd be landlocked. Or maybe you're at a lake, I don't know. Also, Steve says, especially the young, they just can't, I'm assuming you mean can't survive without their phones. Yes, but then
I
phones
think
are
we
used for all sorts of things.
We may have missed our chat or something. It feels I think we must have scrolled past some back.
Maybe,
but
yeah,
that's
yeah.
fine.
Steve also says, Conan 2D20 uses a Doom mechanic, got confused with D&D inspiration. That's what I thought.
Okay, so
Yep, here we go. Yeah, here's the stuff that we've missed. Oh my goodness me.
oh gosh, there's lots.
Right, we're going to pause our discussion and read the chat.
Should we just go fast and then carry on with the next topic?
Yep, sure. Right, socialist. Left is best. Two is individual.
Whilst you're mumbling into the microphone, I'm going to take the next topic, which is...
here we go. I found it.
Make a done. Oh, we've caught up.
Yeah. So Scoppo says 5e inspiration sucks. Takes all sorts of bonuses and turns them into you begging for inspiration from the DM. Well, again, I've never been in a group that really does inspiration that much. I've never seen players beg for inspiration before.
I've certainly done things I thought deserved it.
Oh yeah, I have too, but I've never gone, oh, I should have got inspiration for that.
Usually
'Cause-
only get it for recapping the previous session.
But also we're British.
We're far too polite to give
Yes.
out rewards.
Well, no, it's not that. As in,
What we
it's-
could do is
no,
be
no, no,
cynical
no.
to
As
each
in the
other.
other way. So if we do something really thespian and then we don't get a thing, then we're far too polite to say, actually, do you think maybe I could have some
Oh, good grief.
inspiration?
No, you
No.
can't ask for something like that.
Nope.
It has to be given freely.
Nope. RLL says, sometimes keeping balance comes from the players. I turned up for a game with characters who'd found fantastic swords in the previous adventure, and they had such an advantage as a team that the game was boring for the rest of us. There's more. Then they got cocky in over their heads and were knocked out in a fight. We grabbed these overpowered swords and hid them. Then when everyone recovered, we just said, ogres stole the swords. Yep, that sounds good. Thought that move made us worse. Although that move made us worse, as a fighting group, we'd restored balance to the force.
Damn straight.
Yep.
Yeah. Look, I wonder how you justify that from a role-playing perspective. Maybe it's still the characters being jealous and knew if they'd stolen them, they'd be seen with them, so hide them. Yeah, it gets rid of somebody else. Yeah, I can see that. Okay. Steve Ross says, monkey, button, banana equals humans in Facebook. You're not wrong. Facebook, the way they deliver notifications to you is also deliberately designed around Skinnerbox mechanics.
Yeah, I've turned off all my notifications on my phone for Facebook except for the little bar at the top, so I hate those little circles that pop up on your screen. I hate how it vibrates for every single notification. I hate it.
Yeah, I don't get those, but I do get the notification numbers when I'm within the app.
Yeah, well, I don't know
And
if
it
you
is
can
habitual to
turn that
clear
off.
them. They've trained me to be addicted to that. And I really want to remove Facebook from my life, but there's too much RPG content on it.
Yeah, too much RPG content, and we keep in touch with certain groups of people and communities and stuff, so...
Yeah, they've locked us in.
Yeah.
Sods.
Yes. And then people have been talking to each other. Scarborough says, sadly, it must be genetic, as a species not so far from the jungle after all. And Michael B says, we do share something like 90+% genetics with apes, so I have heard.
Yeah,
More chimpanzees than
95%
apes.
of bananas' genome can be found inside the human, but it's genes are an interesting thing. Like because they determine so much about us, but at the same time they're one of the least important attributes we have. Like, I do not know what your genes are, and that I could not identify.
Well, they're from Giacomo.
The point is, I have no idea what genome number or chromosome 9 does.
Thank you, Kitty.
And, I couldn't tell you if you were GATC or whatever on chromosome 9, or indeed anyone else, or 12, or any other chromosome number. Like, what purpose do they really serve, function in our lives? And yet, apparently, they control quite a lot. But, I don't know.
Kitty is behind
They
the
don't
wall.
seem to... It's not like I can go, oh, look, that's somebody with a G on chromosome 18.
No.
It doesn't work like that. So yes, we share a lot of our genetics with other things because life all has this kind of common ancestry, but ultimately it's meaningless. So, and that 96% of banana DNA is within us, but the difference makes such a huge difference that I'm a human.
The difference
Mostly.
makes such a huge difference.
The difference in genome makes such a huge difference in end result that I am human. And a banana is a banana, even though 96% of its DNA can be found within me.
Yes, okay.
That's mostly because I eat a lot of bananas.
One side power outage away from complete pandemonium.
Yeah, which, interesting, 2-3 years ago now, the Earth missed a magnetic solar flare from the Sun by 9 days, so it passed our orbit by 9 days. If it had struck, every single communication satellite, and every satellite we have, would have blacked out. Envelopes in submarines would have been opened, not in Russian ones, they just fire. They don't have an envelope. And because there would have been no communication, that just would have happened, and we missed that solar flare by 9 days. It could happen at any moment.
Yeah.
The magnetic poles could flip at any moment. We really are a doomed species. My entire job and vocation, and therefore the mortgage, is utterly dependent
This
on the
has
internet.
taken a rather dark and realistic turn.
We're living on a nice edge the
We're
entire
supposed
time.
to be talking about role-playing and
Yes.
happy stuff and utopia, and none of this is really happening.
Right. I don't know. Should we skip for the RPG content in here?
Yeah, sure, they start talking about Mad Max and things, I believe, and hence why that's called Food, Water, Shelter,
Okay, right. So we're caught roughly up. Arizona is a desert, plenty of sand, just no ocean. Russell
Yes, I'm
Higgins
aware of
says,
that.
my umbrella drink got in the way of spelling out vacation. I apologise.
Wow. I hope it's something nice like pina colada. Because I do like pina coladas. I don't have them very often, but I just love the idea of being on a beach setting with a pina colada or in a pool.
How do we make the classic dungeon bash more exciting?
You put pina coladas in them.
Is there any point carrying on the stream? Have we reached the zenith of this now?
No, we haven't. Okay, so dungeon crawls.
First of all, just the environment of a dungeon itself, I actually find them quite tricky to include. Wow, is there a big outage in our stream?
Yeah.
Did we lose internet? There's a big drop off a moment ago.
Yeah.
Was that when you were mumbling in the mic? Did everyone hit the refresh button wondering what was wrong?
No, surely there should have been more viewers because they thought it was ASMR.
Yeah. I think every single ASMR channel's got more subs than we do.
Yeah.
So,
Next, ASMR. No, let's do dungeons.
dungeons. My favourite topic.
But you're right, they are weird. I've always found them a weird terrain. Because, like, before I really got into tabletop RPGs, I'd done Choose Your Own Adventures, I'd done video games, like, things like that involve fantasy settings, so yeah, there's going to be terrains like mountains and forests and stuff. But then I only really heard about dungeons through Legend of Zelda, in that yes, you go into a dungeon and you fight monsters. And I'm thinking,
they're so contrived.
you what? I didn't even understand. It's like, well, what do you mean? A dungeon's in like a castle or a prison? It's where you keep a prisoner.
Castles don't even particularly have dungeons.
No,
Usually what
but-
they call a dungeon or donjon originated from the term donjon in France. That was at the top of a tower, not underground.
Well, yeah, that too. So, you know, that's where dungeons are. So this whole concept of this random underground thing in the wilderness that you go into and you fight monsters and you get treasure was really strange to me. It made no sense.
It got a little bit in the sense there are various towns across the UK that are riddled with underground tunnels. I've lived in one. Bishop Stortford has something over 11 miles of tunnels. Nottingham is famous for its tunnels because some of them are public.
Yes.
The ones in the town I used to live in weren't, although I worked in a pub that had an entrance to them in the cellar. I also knew several other entrances. Yeah,
cool.
yeah. I also knew of several
makes
other
more
entrances,
sense.
and I had been down one that wasn't supposed to be in, but
Oopsie.
went down a little bit. But there's only so far you can go before you lose the light and stuff. But yeah, these tunnels are just like some places have had them since medieval time. The majority were dug in the medieval period, and it's kind of, you know, the interesting. You look at Nottingham. Nottingham is the most famous for its tunnels, but its particular tunnels aren't actually that long. Like, no particular tunnel is particularly massive. It's not like it's this huge network. And we tend to think of, you know, in when we think of dungeons in a D&D sense, it's like a tunnel network. And it's not like that at all. Also, we tend to think of, you know, dungeons as having rooms, defined rooms. And quite often, the tunnels that, at least the ones that are under Britain, quite often don't have rooms.
Yeah. My first experience of a dungeon in that setting was actually a fighting fantasy book called Death Trap Dungeon. So it is a dungeon crawl. But to me it made sense for one fundamental reason. It had been deliberately built by somebody running a very deadly competition. So it wasn't some random thing hidden away somewhere. This really rich dude had built it and said, right, the best adventurers, if they get through, they get 50,000 gold pieces. So therefore, it's going to have traps and rooms, and it made sense.
I did a similar thing once in an adventure I ran, where it was set in a fantasy world. You know, the players were fighter, rogue, all that kind of usual nonsense, but the dungeon was actually an attraction. Like, the goblins were hired and paid to be the monsters to scare the members of the public.
Yeah.
Right? But the adventurers had come in a different way and had no idea that this was actually just like an escape room type thing in the medieval period, and were killing the goblins, who were really, really surprised to be getting killed.
Wow. That's actually a really good idea.
Yeah. Didn't play out so well because one of the players didn't like not being GM.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
in that particular group, he only ever wanted to be GM, and so
That's a bit random.
He just had such a low attention span. I ended up having to, kind of ruined the whole game. But anyway, no, the concept of a dungeon really, in the classical sense of D&D, doesn't work. But we put them in classic D&D, and we kind of allow it to be in classic D&D, and D&D kind of gets away with it with this concept of the Underdark. It's an underground world with different races, and different. It's a different world, and it's not the surface world that we're familiar with. It's another world, and there are points at which it intersects with our own. So it almost makes it like another plane of existence.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah,
kind of, except the occasional purple worm might accidentally burrow a new entrance.
But also dungeon terrain, I never quite understood either. Because a lot of the dungeons I've made, and I don't make that many for my games, but when I do, they're always something old that's been abandoned that is part of something else, so it has a history. But this whole thing of dungeon terrain, it's like, yes, you get these like grey slabs, like paving slabs, and they're all pristinely done, or like semi-pristinely, and all the corridors and rooms are square and
happen to be 10 foot wide.
5 foot by 10 foot room. It's like, again, it made no sense to me.
Yeah, there are some flaws in old school thinking, and certainly in that regard. But I think if we're gonna reimagine, how to make a dungeon session more exciting, we first have to define what is the dungeon session. Is this an old ruin, which is one classic way of getting around the problem, and then you can build whatever that ruin is can have its associated history. So if it was a place where it was a temple where people got buried, there's your undead, blah blah blah.
Yep, tomb.
But if you want something more of an ecosystem, and you're doing a Forgotten Realms type fantasy, then you're looking more at an Underdark type dungeon, where you can have vastness and scale and regions and a world that parallels what's on top, but with different races, different borders, and different politics. And what you can, in so doing, essentially put two entirely different adventures and game worlds into the same map and run them in parallel, and have the players geographically challenged by this second layer to your map. Now that could be quite interesting.
You kind of did an encounter idea like that, but it was more to do with time, but it was essentially manipulation.
The 4-dimensional dungeon. Yeah. Well, yeah, no, that was the more of the ruined temple approach. So there's an old video on the channel called the 4-dimensional dungeon, which I particularly loved that encounter. It was the one I ran for the Brawlers 1 campaign, and it that encounter went down really well. I think it was the best one of the campaign. There were some good encounters in that campaign, but I think that was like one of the most mechanically profound puzzles I think I've ever created. And it's well worth checking that video out if you haven't seen it. But yeah, that was taking this is a ruined temple approach, and so you had this same location running sort of twice in parallel, and then the players would shift between them quite randomly at various points. The way I ran it, the way I presented it in the video, kind of gives you the tools to build the encounter you want to build out of it. But the thing about the Underdark as a location, if let's say you've got a race of relatively friendly people, right?
Yeah.
Let's call them gnomes, but they're friendly gnomes.
Can we use those little animals you saw this morning?
Oh my god, I can't remember what they're called. Little cute marsupial thing from some island off Australia. They were utterly adorable. But I don't know what they're called.
Okay, but say we had something like that.
Right, little fluffy gnomes with tummy pouches, right? They are the underground race. They have, let's say, an expat community in one of the big human cities, and the players are from the human city, right? This is a hypothetical scenario. Now, the players get involved in some plot intrigue, aka campaign, in the city, right? And as part of that campaign, they meet some of our fluffy gnomes with tummy pouches. And
especially the tummy pouches.
Those tummy pouchy people give the players some guidance, whatever, but they also ask a favour. and they drag the players down to the underworld, and there they get embroiled in some of the politics there. And those little fluffy tummy pouch gnomes are dealing with some dark elves, and they're dealing with some, I don't know, some underground orcs, and they're dealing with some hobgoblins and stuff, and there's all these different disparate underground empires.
I'm surprised they're still very happy.
Well, maybe that's why there's an expat community. I don't know.
Okay.
Anyway, the point is, in your campaign, up on the surface, you've got politics and intrigue, and down below, you've got another potential for politics and intrigue. Now, let's say the players have to travel because of politics and intrigue in this campaign over to here, but in this campaign they've got to go over to. They want to go over to here, but find themselves going over to here, and they can deal with things at the same time there, and then. This campaign's right. We really need to go underground there. What's the fastest way? Overland, underground. Go underground.
Wombling free.
Yeah, absolutely, wombling free. And that's where your encounters come from, and because they're going underground because it's quicker because they haven't got to pass the mountain range. It's like going under Moria. Do you see how you can now use these two parallel worlds together to enhance each other? So I think that would be the approach I would take to do the classic dungeon style adventure.
The way I tend to do dungeons is not call them dungeons.
Well, they rarely are.
But you've got mines, like the Mines of Moria. I would never think of those as a dungeon because it's a stronghold where dwarves used to be before it was ransacked by goblins.
But it absolutely is a dungeon.
Oh, it is a dungeon, and I still frame it in my DM brain as a dungeon, but I never call it a dungeon, because to me that makes it too, what's the word, almost too restricted in what it actually is and what it could do. But something like a mine, or this is no mine, this is a tomb. I think somewhere in there, reading the chat, someone mentioned the pyramid, so that's like more like a tomb as well. You've got again, you might have like a hidden floor or a hidden area of something that's been covered up, kept secret, built on top of. I like to do that a lot, where there's like you reveal like there's stuff underneath. Lots of things where it was there before and now it's changed, and that's kind of been left to ruin, or it's not, but something else has come in and started using it. So I like to do that. Like, I like to have things like orcs kind of almost like come in, find somewhere, like an area, think, oh yeah, this would be good. So then they start personalising it, as it were, and making it their own.
I completely agree with that. How much longer are we going to go on for?
I don't know.
Because I was running out. I might do a second break.
Okay, well, I'm happy to go through the chat as long as you get me some water.
You need water. I'm going to have second breakfast.
Beg pardon?
I don't think he knows about second breakfast. Another break.
I know about 11s. Second breakfast.
Right. Which glass is your water glass? The nearest. Okay.
The glass one.
Should I try and knock them over?
No. Please do not. Becky's legs, everyone. Okay, so we have got more in the chat. Michael B says, I always thought of it like a forgotten empire built over or grown over. Yeah, exactly. So you've got tunnels, the Becky mentioned, catacombs, things that have been either deliberately swept under the rug, shall we call it that, forgotten about deliberately, or, either assigned because of, say, a battle, or even the weather. Like, you might have things like sand, water, maybe fire if something's burnt, that kind of thing. So, like, I don't know, you've got an old layer of something that's burnt, and then you've got something that's been built on top, things like that. So natural disasters, things are going to be left behind, but still sort of there and uncovered. Naturally, you have more urban things like sewers as well, which are, of course, very snaky and tunnely and things like that. And you might have certain communities, like more on the evil side. So like orcs, you've got your Skaven from Warhammer, various things like that. You've got your thieves guilds that again have kind of personalized it for their own and kind of created their own community in it. So yeah, I never call a dungeon because to me that just goes back to you go into a 10 foot by 5 foot square rectangular room and it's got lovely grey paving on it, and it's just like, no, stop, no. Also, real medieval areas didn't have the means or pressure to create underground living / prison / mining that Fantasylands do. Yeah, exactly. That's another thing about friggin' dungeons, in that they don't seem to need any maintenance. Like, they still kind of look a bit worn around the edges, and yet people can apparently live down there, and it's like, sorry, what? And then, of course, you have your trope of there's a giant dragon boss, and it's like, if they physically couldn't get in? Oh, and don't get me started on the exit to a dungeon. Oh my god. I hate dungeon exits. You go through this dungeon and you fight all the nasties and you get the treasure. And then the exit's just over there. No. So wrong. I missed a bit at the end, Scott, sorry. No. Robert E. Howard's Worms of the Earth type stories must have lent to Gaiac's ideas. I will take your word for it. So too would European mausoleums, yeah, and Egyptian pyramids. Yeah, so, with a pyramid, I've loved Egyptian stuff ever since I was really young, so I knew all about the booby traps, and, you got your spears coming out of the ground, and your slicer blades and all that stuff. But again, it's a tomb, it has a function. And yes, it can be forgotten because the ancient Egyptians lived, a couple of thousand years ago, and, thousands of years later, we're sort of scraping the sand off with a brush type thing. So yeah, it's been sort of semi-lost and forgotten, but then it's uncovered. So, yeah. Thank you, my love.
I owe you an apology.
Why?
Can I just squeeze by?
Why?
Because apparently I've not been making enough drinks lately, and I know this because both the ice trays are like at the end and empty. I've only got one ice cube.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, and you never refill the ice tray. That's how I know I've not been doing the drinks.
I actually do.
Mm-hmm.
I actually do, and Kitty is now playing in here.
Awesome. Hello, Kitty. Welcome to the stream, very briefly. Where are we up to?
I was ranting about exits to dungeons.
Exits to dungeons. Well, I was going to rant about doors.
Ah, okay.
Because doors are a big problem.
I've almost finished... Well, not almost finished. I'm not finished going through chat at all.
So doors are a huge issue, I think, in dungeons because they're essentially the same encounter over and over. No matter what you put the other side, if it's any kind of combat at all, by allowing the players to open the door... What are you doing?
I'm listening in at the door.
Oh. By allowing the players to open the door, you're giving them the opportunity for a doorway fight, which means you can't outnumber them. And so doors are this repeating encounter. And, there's the standard tropes. Listen at the door. Okay, you can put a seeker and drills into the ear or whatever. You can put a... there's the check for traps because the door could be trapped. And then there's the monsters the other side. And so you get the listen, the pick locks and all that kind of stuff. And it's an encounter I must have done hundreds upon hundreds of times. And then when you get the fight and it's lots of creatures, you use the door to prevent the enemy from committing defeat in detail, using their numbers against you because you're using the doorway. And it's dull now. I've done it too much. So one of the things I think is really important to remember as a GM is that if there's a door, never trap your doors for a start, because the doors should be used. They should be used by the inhabitants of this dungeon, whatever this dungeon actually is.
Yeah, it goes back to the whole thing of, the big bad's just sitting there twiddling their thumbs waiting for the adventurers to come and kill them.
When's the last time you had an adventurer at the door, listening at the door, and it opened? And it's not because they failed a stealth roll, It's because the NPC or monster beyond was about to go to the bathroom.
Or make a sandwich.
When did you last do that? Because if it's never, as I think it is for most of us, I think that's not good enough.
We should put that in.
At the same moment, someone's walking up the corridor the other way because they've just returned from the bathroom, or whatever reason it is.
Yeah, exactly.
Or they've just been out for an afternoon stroll because they fancied looking at the granite. Because, I don't know, when that's your scenery, maybe you like different forms of rock. I don't know. What's your scenery to an underground dweller?
Mildew and stuff.
Yeah.
I am just wary of how big the chat is getting, so we should probably go through it. So RLL says, I tend to think of the dungeon as a symbol for the heroic descent into the underworld, along the lines of Orpheus or other confrontations with inner mental hell, facing fears and all of that.
But a D&D world packed with underground monster camps always struck me as silly.
Yes.
I mean, if you think of it in those terms, then yes. But I'm not averse to having an Underdark in my game worlds. The Brawlers world has an Underdark. You've played in the Brawlers 2 campaign. There's been no entry to, no one's gone. It's not been a thing yet. But in the first campaign, everywhere that was above surface, there was an underground world as well, and the players did sometimes travel through it.
Okay.
Because it was old school and it was reliving some of the awesome stuff of our childhood, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think you can, fit that kind of setting into a truly fantasy world, because yes, it is nuts when you think about it in our modern world. When 11 miles of tunnel under, actually I think it might have been over 100 miles of tunnel actually under Bishop Stortford. Massive tunnel networks, but it's still nothing compared to what you can get in a dungeon. And some of the tunnels were going out to villages and stuff in the surrounding area, and that's it's crazy, but it doesn't matter because it's fantasy. But there definitely comes a point where if you're wandering around to different dungeon doorways and going into them, and there's this sort of pocket dungeon that's got hobgoblins there, goblins there, and an orc camp in that one, then that is quite ridiculous. Like, who's making all these tunnels?
Yeah, exactly. And I was mentioning before, I don't know if you heard, but I was talking about how, and someone else said as well, it's like there's no maintenance involved. Like, everything is just fine.
And the other thing is, all the roofs would need to be arched.
Yeah, which they never are.
Because you've got to support the weight above.
Yeah, but they never are. They're always square.
Yes.
Steve Ross says, best dungeon creature that really messed with the PCs in D&D, a small group of rust monsters.
You gotta love the rust monster. Yeah. The Malays that are usually right up the front are going, magic user!
Yep. And Lord Morb says, well, the huge underground labyrinth dungeon model is a bit unrealistic, but then again, it is a fantasy.
Yeah, and I do agree, but I think when you do, if the dungeon is a dungeon rather than a ruined temple or whatever else, then it absolutely needs to be a mega dungeon. It needs to be huge. Because if you're going to do it, in for a penny, in for a pound, don't have multiple dungeons, I think. That's where the world can feel a bit fake and pastiche and stuff. Have a big dungeon. A ridiculous, over-the-top fantasy dungeon.
Yep. Yeah, I think you should have the big bad actually, like, scraping cement, like, actually making the
big
dungeon.
Bad is the, what are they called?
The
that
bricklayer.
Guild? The Masons.
Oh, the Freemasons. It might be in some people's campaigns. Scott Poe seems to like your fuzzy little marsupial gnomes, as does Lord Morbius. Google says they are a quokka.
That's it. Yes. It, yeah. Oh my god, they're so adorable. They always look so happy.
Quokka in the troglodyte language means bucket, according to Lord Morbius. Apparently. And the Mines of Moria, where the Balrog fell into the depths of darkness with Gandalf and forgot that it had wings and could fly. Yeah, this whole thing of, oh yes, they dug too deep and Balrog and shit.
Why was there a flying creature under the ground? Why do Balrogs have wings?
Well, isn't it supposed to be that they dug so deep that they almost kind of dug their way into hell? Is that what it means with the whole Balrog? Well, Michael B is
hell in the Lord of the Rings.
No,
mythology.
that's true. They do have Udon, like the flame of Udon. Yeah. Michael B argues they were decorative wings. Yeah, it's like
they were flamey, and if you move something on fire fast, they does tend to extinguish.
Yeah, exactly.
So that makes perfect sense in physics.
And Steve says painted on wings, so either decorative or painted.
I know there were flames and wings of flame.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, but Steve argues that they were painted on. Hence why they couldn't fly. Lord Morbius thinks the Balrog was cosplaying. That'd be hilarious if it was just a lost cosplayer. Which way to Gen Con? I'm really hot in this suit.
You shall not pass! But I leave the bathroom, it takes me 20 minutes to undress.
Scarpo says massive bomb shelters were built under cities in fear of wartime. In a dragon-infested world, castle builders may well do the same.
Hey,
that's an interesting point. Yeah. You're paranoid rich people having shelters.
Yeah, it comes back to the old question. Castles are really poor structures for defending against dragons.
I was just thinking, actually, in like big mansions, of course, you get the spinning bookcases with the secret passages. So that could easily be something incorporated into a more dungeon thing.
Yeah, in the real world, I went to school in an Elizabethan manor.
So you had spinning bookcases?
No, but we did have one of those priest cubbyhole things. So at one point during the history of Britain, the Catholic faith, I believe it was, became outlawed for a time. And there was some period of history where it flip-flopped between Catholicism and Protestantism as different kings and queens came and went. Yeah,
there was the whole thing with Bloody Mary and Queen Elizabeth.
Now, what happened in a lot of stately homes is they built little cubby holes for priests to hide in. Now, I went to a school in an old Elizabethan manor that actually had one of these cubby holes. And it really was tiny. Like, you could stand in there and the bookcase would come in front of you and stuff. But that was it. You couldn't move.
Whoa.
You were just going to stand there until whoever was searching the place was gone. But you were hidden in that cubbyhole, and it was all shut up and stuff. So, there wasn't actually a classroom in there and stuff. And they arranged the furniture such that you couldn't actually use it.
I've just thought of something. At my school, we didn't have cubby holes, but there was an underground boxing ring.
Wow, that's really Fight Club.
Obviously out of bounds, but in the robing room, because I was in the choir. Yes, right. We have a robing room where we kept all our robes. There was a trap door under the carpet. And that went down into a load of underground passageways, a bit kind of like Mazes and Monsters almost, and there was a boxing ring in the centre.
Right, but what defined that space as a boxing ring? Did it actually have a modern ring in?
A boxing ring in the
So
middle.
it was still used?
No, not anymore, because it was all out of bounds.
Right.
Like, no one was allowed to go down there at all, but back, sort of 15-ish years beforehand, yes, it was being used as a boxing ring.
Now, this is what amazes me about underground spaces in the modern world in Britain. We have all these forgotten and unused underground spaces. Now, I lived in a house once that had a basement, and I turned that basement into a cinema, because why wouldn't you?
Why not?
So I had this 20-foot screen and stuff, and it was awesome for watching films. Back in the day, the resolution wasn't that great, unfortunately, because this was quite a few years ago. But, it was great. But my next door neighbour was the only other house to have a basement. And theirs wasn't usable.
Why not?
It was barely accessible, and you could get into it, but then it was like filled with dirt and stuff. And it's like, why don't you fucking empty it out? It only takes a shovel. I mean, seriously, when you think about how space, particularly in Britain, is, I know it's less of an issue for our American audience, where a lot of the houses
are
tend
huge.
well, depending on where you are. If you're in a city, I think it's much the same.
They're teeny-weeny.
But, you know, Britain houses are relatively small because it's a small island for the population count. And so there's all this space underground, and so much of it is disused or unused or inaccessible. And why aren't we using this more? And, you know, if you go back to a fantasy world where it seems to me that in history this stuff was used more and people were more industrious at digging out the ground, then there's a lot more that can be done with that. And we kind of have to take ourselves out of our modern mindset to do it. You know, and why can't a dungeon encounter essentially be the fantasy equivalent of a cinema? You know, under someone's home. But it does bring us back to that point that a lot of these spaces are actually a lot smaller than D&D presents them in the sort of classic sense. Yeah. So where are we up to? If you love Medusa the cat, click the like and subscribe button. I couldn't agree more.
If you don't love Medusa, you're just a monster.
And the notification bell.
And the bell.
Or Medusa will hiss at you. And I assure you, if you meet Medusa for Will,
she will hiss at you.
Will. Yeah.
Scott Post says, I click like, but not because of cat threats. Okay. Each to their own. Finger can reach. Oh, sorry.
The chat's moving. You have to use the scroll thing this late in the stream. Not
it's
the mouse wheel.
Kind of annoying.
Yeah. Yay, Google. Michael B says, only a few published modules have bathroom amenities in the dungeon.
Mm-hmm.
I always appreciate it when it was done.
Yes.
Yeah, and, you know, why isn't it? And of course, you know, there's the classic monster, the Otyugh, is there precisely for that kind of, answering that kind of question as why is there never a bathroom? Lord Morbius says, the cat shall allow you to live, to put
pet kitties
on another day. You are blessed by the fuzzy one. Now you see, Medusa is not an aggressive cat, has to be said. She is capable of hunting at most a small insect, definitely not a large one.
There was a very funny moment where she saw this spider on the floor and she was curious and she's like, oh yeah, I could take that. And then it started coming towards her and she's like, oh, no, okay, bye. This is a spider. It was so hilarious.
Yeah.
In the same way that she kind of looks out at pigeons way over there and probably thinks they're really tiny. And I keep saying, Medusa, if you were right next to that pigeon, you would run away.
The interesting thing about cats is that they're actually socialists and live in communes called clouders. And cats will naturally go to different roles. So you'll have a cat that's good at hunting, will be the hunter for the clouder. Medusa is definitely the cat that would look after the pet human and cuddle it. That is her only capability.
Yeah, she's very good at meowing at us if we're not in bed at a certain time and things like that. She's very good at cuddles. As long as she, you know, trusts you.
Yeah.
Hence the hissing.
Yes. She's not good with new people. She was abused the first 2 years of her life. And I know what you're thinking. Becky, why would you do that? But it wasn't me. She's a rescue cat.
No. Right, so what's the next one? The career path thing. RLL. We're at the end.
There's a Warhammer career path, dungeon maintenance, dungeon candle lighter, dungeon plumber, leads to dungeon boss monster in the end.
I don't know if that's a genuine career. I've not heard of it.
I think that's a joke.
Okay, but that'd be awesome.
It's certainly not in the older Warhammer that I've played. I haven't.
Yeah, dungeon maintenance, like dungeon terrain paver, you know, paving stones.
Yeah, given how many of the damn miniature sets of dungeons I've painted, I have a horrible feeling that would be my career.
Yep, I think we've lost it. Right, okay. Looks like the sprawling underground complex isn't so unimaginable after all. No, it's not. If you look at it in a certain way. Michael B says, look at the Paris catacombs, indeed, or subways of New York. Well, I think of the subways here in London. Not in
London
Scotland.
is
It's just a
is
circle.
maze underground.
Yes.
Like there's so many levels of things. You got the Victorian sewers. You got the underground going crisscrossing over each other. You got various subways. You got various amenities and things.
Mm-hmm.
But and as somebody mentioned, there's Whitehall. You know I'm have signed the Official Secrets Act. I can't talk about it, but there's stuff there. There's a bank under there.
Yes, there is actually. Yeah.
Like Britain's gold reserves are stored somewhere under London, along with the gold reserves of several other nations. There's a lot of stuff, but in some ways it's not as interesting. There's an American city I was reading about recently. The city itself was prone to flooding. I'm trying to remember the name, but unfortunately I don't remember because it was a few weeks ago. No, it was a few weeks ago I read this. This particular city was susceptible to flooding, and so at some point the entire city got raised one floor. Or huge sections of the city were raised one floor. So there's this basement level of a large part of the city where, you know, in these basements there are old shop fronts.
Cool.
And stuff, which, yeah, is kind of cool. But basically, you know, if you imagine it, like, one shop raises its level up and the surrounding land, the neighbours have to do it too.
I mentioned this earlier with things like natural disasters and weather. You might have something that's partially destroyed or left behind, and then either built on top of, or it's been forgotten, but it's still there, sort of. So yeah, you've got all of those. Morby says, Medusa works in mysterious ways. She may not be aggressive, so she employs an army of leg breaker thugs like me. I see. London has a whole government complex from World War II, somewhere underground in London.
That's why I was referring to, you know, Whitehall.
Yeah. Scott says, I made him think of a point. What if these boring grayscale dungeons were once painted gaudy pastels like Greek sculptures, now faded away?
Yeah. I mean, one of the reasons I think, you know, I know when with Dungeon Miniatures, when Dwarven Forge sort of released the sort of first ones that got people into this, and they painted theirs grey. I got that set and I painted it yellow. Like, I went for a sandstone inspired dungeon because the worst thing I could imagine was painting a dungeon grey, because that's dull and muted and stuff. You know, one of my early dungeons, a small one, I did paint black in order to let the characters and the monsters stand out. But if you're building what you hope is to be beautiful scenery, the last thing I could ever imagine doing was painting it grey. And when I did eventually do a grey dungeon, that one is decorated with so much stuff, you know, dead animal carcasses and stuff that are made out of hot glue and pipes and things, just to give it colour. And it's actually one of my most colourful dungeons. You know, there's blood splats on the ground. There's some of the walls have, you know, those sort of tally marks and things. Again,
no maintenance.
Yeah, well, that one's definitely not being maintained because I cast it myself, so it barely fits together.
Michael B says something like that happened in Seattle, Washington. There are even tours of them now. And RLL says Ray City sounds like Seattle. It was a storyline about shopfronts undergrounds in a Green Arrow comic, and that was set in Seattle at the time. Becky's mention of shopfronts reminded me of that.
I think the city I was reading about was actually I say city, I think it was a small town, but I do think it was in the area of Seattle. So that does make some sense. Yes, I think.
Well, it makes sense. It's on the coast.
Yeah, so it'll be the one I was reading about was a smaller place, but yes, nearby, and I can imagine that's happened in Seattle too. Scott Poe, all the remains of the statue king Ozymandias, so old it has deteriorated into near meaninglessness. Ozymandias. Sounds like Asmodeus from the demon that runs hell. But Chicago was raised over 4 feet in the 19th century to build its sewer. Yes, that's another one that was raised for quite interesting reasons.
I didn't know that. I knew about them redirecting the water system, like turned it around completely to sort out the hygiene issues it was having. like
yeah,
the
no,
sewage
I think
and stuff. But
I think it was the
yeah.
case in Chicago. The ground was bedrock, like you couldn't.
Yes,
they
it was
couldn't
actually.
dig into it. So they raised the city
Ah.
instead.
Yes, I remember. I had to research a lot of Chicago in the 1920s for a Cthulhu module.
Oh yes, you did.
I
didn't
did,
you?
yes. Yes, so we've come to the end of the chat.
Yes. So does that mean I can go to bed?
We should probably wrap up the stream.
I think we should.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for watching, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed tonight's varied discussion, mostly on RPGs,
Nestle.
with some socialism.
And history and fun facts about boxing rings underneath schools.
And cute Australian marsupials from a small island off the western coast called something or other. They're just so cute, whatever they're called. Michael B says, my name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains.
You missed out a bit.
Did I?
He's referring to the Shelley poem.
The Shelley poem. Shelley, as in the
Mary
guy who
Shelley.
did the AC Cobra tie-in thing with the Ford.
I don't know. I'm not that familiar. Steve is asking, are we playing on Monday? We should be, as far as I know.
Yes, it got cancelled last week because one of the
players is moving
couldn't-
house.
Yeah, no, it's something.
It would depend if he's available, but I imagine we are. We will have to check with Phil.
I'm up for it. I almost never let the team down.
Well,
almost
good,
never.
Good for you for not moving house. Shall we thank
the Monday
our...
night game will be back.
Yes.
We should finish by thanking our patrons once more.
Patrons.
Yes, which is somewhere here. The working mirrored image view. There we go. So you can do it this time.
Russell Higgins, Jolly Mangina, Mark Threlfall, Ormber, Brandon Fishwick, Dave Poirier, I said it right this week, AJ, Fuke Enterprises, Nate Hanshin, Philip Bate, and Elizabeth Chai Praditcool. Thank you all. You are
Thank you.
officially the most awesome people in the world. Whee!
And you know what? We've actually, for once, got the end stream button up on screen because you now have two screens.
Hooray!
So, yay! So thank you very much for watching, guys. Have a great weekend. We will see you next Friday at the same time as always.
Be there.
Bye bye.